Welcome back to my channel where I talk about anything and everything biology. In today's video, I'm covering a gruesome murder which took place in a lab that is in a research center near Yale University where a postdoctoral student is murdered, unfortunately. I don't have time to cover all the aspects of this case, and I have a link in the video description below that you can click through to see the story unfold from the beginning all the way to the end. But in today's video, I'm going to take out a particular segment which is very intriguing, where two sets of DNA from two different men were found on the murder victim, where one of the men has died 2 years before this murder took place. How on earth did that happen? Before we proceed, I have tried to draw out the crime scene so as to better help me explain what happened. But please do not expect a professional artist impression. This is not. And let's go on to a more somber tone immediately of what happened. So the female Asian murder victim was R-worded, and the murderer decided to push her small Asian frame through the opening, which is extremely small, on top of the toilet seat. And behind this wall, where the small hole is a little bit of a space and mechanical structure. So when the ingenious investigators, they somehow figured out that the body was, they've been looking up and down, high and low. They couldn't find the body, but they begin to understand the building, and there are some little clues here and there that pointed them there. One of them is a police dog who is able to smell decomposing human flesh. And when the dog sat there and looked at the wall, because the whole area has been cleaned up, so they were wondering what's with this wall. There's obviously no physical signs of any decomposing corpses right there in the toilet cubicle, but this body was hidden behind the toilet wall. So the investigators eventually found that out. So when they went into the small crevice and recovered the body, the forensic scientists recovered two sets of DNA. One is from the murderer, of course, and the second one from a man who has died 2 years before this murder ever took place. So the question to ask is, how did the second set of DNA end up on the murder victim? He died 2 years ago, right? So the story, when they backtraced it, was that this man was working on the building, and the building was relatively new. So he was working to install the mechanical struts that is behind the toilet wall. So when the body was falling through, the victim's body rubbed against the mechanical struts, which contained the DNA, because the construction worker was directly in contact with the mechanical struts, leaving his DNA there. And subsequently, after the completion of the building, he was involved in some shooting and he died. So when the body and the murder took place, the body fell through into the crevice, rubbing against the mechanical struts, collected this DNA. So when the forensic scientists collected some samples from the murder victim, collected the DNA from this second man as well. So then the next question is, it has been 2 years and the DNA is intact and still there from this construction worker? How is that possible? The construction worker's cells that is deposited onto the mechanical structural support is made up of 4 biomolecules, which are the carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. The first 3 are very easily degraded because the decomposers can secrete enzymes which break down these molecules so that the monomers can then be utilized as a resource, as a nutrient that can be used by the decomposers to reproduce. The last one, the nucleic acid, is further broken down into 2 types, the RNA and DNA. DNA is very resilient. It hangs around for a long period of time, even after the organism or person that has harbored this DNA has long passed, which is why we can recover dinosaurs' DNA. If not in full, then at least partially. So why is it so hardy? That's because the DNA is made up of two strands. These two strands are stuck together by hydrogen bond, and as you can see in this figure, they are represented by circular dots. In a DNA molecule, in one strand of DNA, there are millions of nitrogenous bases. On the other strand, there's also millions of nitrogenous bases. So the nitrogenous bases form hydrogen bonds with each other. And because there's millions of these bases of them, this means that the sum total of the hydrogen bonds can be very high. And if you want to degrade this double-stranded DNA structure, you need to break these hydrogen bonds, and they're very difficult to break, which is also the reason why it is so hardy and can resist the test of time, hanging around for 2 years until it comes into contact with the murder victim. That then brings us to the next question. Can you then trust the DNA or accept the admission of DNA as an evidence of crime then? Unfortunately, in this situation, it is not 100%. Why do I say that? First, the DNA evidence, if you want to submit it as evidence, is definitely unambiguous, because when you look at what DNA is made up of, which is the nitrogenous bases, you can sequence them and they will turn out very precise, like ACGT. And this sequence of DNA bases will point or identify the owner of the DNA. That is unambiguous. It's very clear-cut. However, it is not definitive in saying that this person is the culprit, because DNA hangs around for so long in the environment. Some people can, as you can see in this situation, the murder victim could accidentally acquire this DNA, and the owner of this DNA has nothing to do with the crime scene at all. That is why when it comes to the court system, where you can argue both ways, the people who don't understand the idea or the science behind DNA would think that if a person has got DNA from this other person, then the person is the perpetrator. And in this case, no, it is not.